People say you can tell who someone really is by how they treat waiters. I'd argue you can also tell by how they talk about teachers, especially when they think no one's really listening. I've been a drama teacher for nearly 10 years. I teach at Willow Ridge High, tucked in the corner of our small, rust-stained town. Most of our budget goes to football jerseys and new turf, while I've been sewing costumes from thrift store finds and patching broken stage lights with duct tape and a prayer. And yet, I love what I do. Not in the cheesy, coffee mug quote kind of way, but in the deep, aching part of my chest that knows I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm 32, and yeah, I'm underpaid. I drive a car that rattles every time I hit a bump, and my idea of fancy is ordering guac without checking the price first. But I come alive in that dingy black box theater. I come alive when Jasmine, a painfully shy sophomore, delivers a monologue so raw I forget she's never been on stage before. I come alive when I see the spark in Mateo's eyes as he nails a scene he thought he couldn't do. These kids, they give me something no paycheck ever could. Tyler doesn't understand that. He's my fiancé, tall, charming, with that polished business glow that makes him seem like he's always on a billboard. A corporate consultant, suit, tie, six-figure income. His world runs on metrics and networking events, and sometimes I wonder if he sees me more as a side project than a partner. When we met, he said he admired my passion. Now it feels like he barely tolerates it. We were at our engagement dinner last month. His friends, all shiny shoes and subtle arrogance, laughed at something Tyler said just as I walked over with a plate of sliders. Lena's students are great, he was saying, especially at failing auditions. But hey, at least they're expressive failures, laughter. I froze one step away from the table, my smile locked in place like it had been stapled there. He turned and saw me. Oh babe, I'm joking. You know how much I love your little theater club, not program, not department. Not the thing I've poured my soul into for a decade. I sat down quietly, my stomach churning. I toyed with my food while they talked about IPOs and promotions and destination weddings. Tyler didn't notice, or maybe he did and just didn't care. Later that night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling while he snored lightly. That joke played over and over in my mind, scraping raw against all the sacrifices I'd made. The late nights, the side jobs to fund student trips, the weekends spent repainting scenery with my own two hands. Was I being sensitive? Maybe. But I've learned that constant little cuts hurt more than a single deep wound. Tyler's been cutting for a while now, death by 1,000 jabs. I closed my eyes and thought about my kids. About Maya, who can cry on cue but can't make eye contact with her own father. About Deshawn, whose poetry reads like prophecy. About Louis, who used to skip class but now builds sets with the precision of a master carpenter. They're messy and moody and brilliant. Some days they drive me nuts, but they show up. They try. They trust me, and in turn I trust them. They remind me of myself. I didn't come from much. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I got my first taste of theater in a dusty rec center, reading Shakespeare from a torn paperback while waiting for my mom to finish her night shift. Acting gave me a voice. Teaching gave me a purpose. I didn't choose this job for praise. God knows I don't get much of it. But when Tyler said, "You could have done something real," I realized he didn't see me at all. He saw a role, the quirky teacher fiancé, the woman who'd eventually step back, settle down, maybe take up Pinterest crafts and leave the real work to him. He doesn't know about the nights I stayed late helping Mateo through panic attacks. Or the time I drove 6 hours with my own money just so Jasmine could perform in a statewide competition. Or the letters I've gotten from students years later, thanking me for believing in them when no one else did. He doesn't know, because he's never asked. That night, I rolled away from him in bed and whispered to the dark, "You think I'm just a teacher." But deep down, a fire lit inside me, the kind that doesn't roar but simmers, quiet, steady, relentless, because I wasn't just a teacher. I was about to prove that I had the power to change lives and maybe even the world. I still remember the sound of the announcement, the faint crackle of the school intercom, followed by the principal's weary voice. Due to upcoming budget reallocations, several extracurricular programs will be discontinued after the semester ends, including drama, art, and dance. My students stared at me, wide-eyed and silent. I could see the heartbreak hit them like a gust of wind. One brave freshman raised his hand. "So we're not doing the spring play," I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Not if I have anything to say about it. Truth was, I didn't have a lot of say. The district had already made up its mind, test scores were the priority, and the arts were always the first on the chopping block. But what they didn't factor in was how stubborn I could be. That night, I sat cross-legged on the worn stage of our auditorium, if you could call it that, and stared at the dusty curtain. My fingers traced the edge of my notebook while I brainstormed every possible way to save the program. I thought of my students, their hunger to express, to be seen, to be more than their zip codes or test scores. Then it came to me, one last show. A full-scale original student production. We'd go all out, market it, fill the seats, draw local press, prove we were worth the funding. The next morning, I marched into the principal's office with a folder labeled Voices Unheard, a community theater event. I pitched it hard, a student-written, student-directed show featuring stories from their own lives. Gritty, honest, raw, I told him it would be powerful enough to make people care. To his credit, he didn't laugh, but he didn't look hopeful either. You can try, he said, but don't expect much. People don't come to school plays, Lena, not in this town. Challenge accepted. I went home buzzing with nervous energy and told Tyler the news, the budget cuts, the plan, everything. He barely looked up from his laptop. You're really going to throw a Hail Mary with a bunch of high schoolers. I kept my tone light, trying to pull him in. They're incredible, Ty. You should have seen Mateo's monologue yesterday. And Jasmine, she's writing something that'll knock people over. He snorted. A play, that's your master plan. What would you know about PR or funding? I flinched. Not because he was wrong, I didn't know much about funding, but because he didn't even try to believe in me. Not even for a second. You're just setting yourself up to be disappointed, he added. This isn't some after-school special. I nodded, pretending to agree, but inside I felt the spark again. The one that says, just watch me, so I got to work. I started a fundraiser online, one of those humble GoFundMe pages with grainy photos of kids in rehearsal and a long, pleading paragraph about the power of the arts. Then I organized bake sales, car washes, raffle nights. I reached out to local businesses, offered ad space in the program for $20 and a handshake. I dipped into my savings, money I'd put aside for the honeymoon Tyler and I hadn't even planned yet, and bought fabric for costumes, paint for sets, and a better sound system from a second-hand shop 2 towns over. I even tracked down a reclusive older man named Daniel Hart, who used to perform on Broadway back in the 70s before he moved here to retire quietly with his cats and garden. He said no at first, but after sitting in on one rehearsal, he was hooked. He offered to mentor the cast and help with direction. It felt like building a castle out of toothpicks, delicate, exhausting, and somehow still beautiful. Meanwhile, Tyler grew more distant. He started working late, said he was networking more aggressively now that a promotion was on the table. I barely saw him on weeknights. On weekends, he'd scroll through his phone while I stapled posters to bulletin boards and ironed thrift store jackets to look like period costumes. He never asked how rehearsals were going, never donated a dime to the fundraiser. When I asked if he'd come to opening night, he shrugged and said, if I'm not traveling. And maybe it was foolish, but I still held on. I still believed that maybe, just maybe, when he saw it all come together, he'd understand. That he'd see the fire in my students and the magic they created, and he'd finally say, I'm proud of you. But as the days went by, his eyes stopped lighting up when I walked in the room. His kisses became distracted, mechanical. And I started to wonder if he was waiting for me to fail, not because he wanted to hurt me, but because it would justify everything he thought he knew about the world. Still, I pushed forward, because I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for the kids who'd been told they weren't worth investing in. And I was doing it for the girl I used to be, the one who sat in a folding chair under a flickering light, dreaming of a stage that could hold all her truth. This might not have been Broadway, but it was ours. And I wasn't going down without a fight. The play had no curtains, no velvet backdrops, no glittery props, just a rickety stage, some black painted plywood, and a group of teenagers willing to bare their souls. We called it Voices Unheard, not just a title, but a promise. These stories were theirs, their truths, their pain, their joy, their defiance. Each scene was crafted from journal entries, late-night text messages, whispered confessions after rehearsal. It was messy and raw and heartbreakingly real. There was no main character. Instead, A rotating chorus of students stepped forward with monologues and vignettes about what it meant to grow up in a world that kept trying to shove them into silence. Jasmine wrote a scene that took my breath away. A quiet girl with big eyes and smaller words, she rarely raised her hand in class. But one night, after everyone else had gone home, she lingered in the wings. "My dad drinks," she said, eyes locked on the scuffed stage floor. "He yells, not just at me, but I think I stopped hearing him a long time ago." She handed me a folded sheet of notebook paper. It was a monologue she'd written about a girl who learns to sleep with music blasting in her ears just so she doesn't hear the violence downstairs. We included it exactly as she wrote it. Then there was Mateo, boisterous, funny, always the class clown, but when he got on stage, something in him changed. He played a boy pretending to be okay, cracking jokes so no one noticed how anxious he really was. It mirrored his own life more than he'd ever admit out loud. "This is the first time I feel like I'm not pretending," he told me after one rehearsal. "It's like people finally see me." We rehearsed every afternoon, some weekends too. The set was minimal, but each scene carried the weight of something real, something that demanded to be heard. The day Tyler finally decided to drop in, we were deep into run-throughs. He texted an hour before, said he had time to swing by. He showed up in slacks and a button-down, smelling like cologne and skepticism. He stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes skimming his phone more than the stage. I tried not to notice, tried to focus on my students who were giving everything they had to this moment. During intermission, I found him leaning against the wall by the double doors. "So," I said, wiping sweat from my neck with a towel, "what do you think?" He shrugged. "It's cute." I froze. "Cute." He gave a crooked smile. "Yeah, very after-school special, sweet, but not exactly Hamilton." He leaned in, lowered his voice. "You really think anyone cares about a bunch of sad teenagers talking about their feelings?" My stomach turned. I stared at him, stunned. "You watched Mateo up there, Jasmine, you didn't feel anything." He shrugged again. "I just think maybe you're overestimating what this can actually do. I mean, let's be real, it's a school play. You're pouring everything into something that's barely going to get a write-up in the local paper." I opened my mouth, then closed it, because in that moment the truth hit harder than his words. He didn't believe in this, he didn't believe in them, and more painfully, he didn't believe in me. It wasn't just the play, it was everything. The way he spoke about my work, my students, my dreams, like they were hobby crafts I'd eventually outgrow. Like I was someone playing house until I came to my senses and joined him in the real world. He had never seen me, not really. Not the way I fought for my kids. Not the way I lay awake at night, scribbling blocking notes in the margins of bills and lesson plans. Not the way I bled passion into every scene, every word. I suddenly felt cold, not because of what he said, but because of how numb I was to it. He handed me his car keys. "I've got a client call in 10. Text me when it's done." I nodded silently, watching him walk out into the evening light like none of this mattered. Back inside, the lights dimmed. Jasmine took the stage again, trembling slightly as she spoke the words she once only trusted to paper. A hush fell over the auditorium, and in that hush, I knew. Tyler would never understand the quiet power of this moment. He wouldn't see the bravery it took for Jasmine to stand there. He wouldn't hear the raw tremble in Mateo's voice as he shouted his final line. He wouldn't feel the hush, the ache, the thunder of silence after the last spotlight faded, but I did. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need someone who couldn't. That night, as I packed up props and rewound mic cords, I began to replay every conversation, every laugh that had a blade behind it, every dismissal dressed as logic. I'd ignored so many signs, but the theater never lies. In the truth of my students' stories, I finally found clarity in my own, and I began to wonder, was I fighting for the wrong stage in my life? Opening night felt like electricity crackling under my skin. The auditorium, usually half empty, echoing with scattered applause, was packed. Really packed. Parents, teachers, even school board members filled the rows. The local newspaper editor sat near the front with a notebook. I spotted someone from a regional theater company and two women whispering excitedly with lanyards I didn't recognize, talent scouts, I later found out. The stage lights buzzed overhead as my students huddled backstage. Mateo was pacing in a circle, mumbling lines under his breath. Jasmine sat cross-legged in the wings, earbuds in, eyes closed, mouthing her monologue like a prayer. I knelt beside her. "You ready?" She opened her eyes slowly. "I think so, I'm scared." I smiled. That means you care. Let the fear drive you, not stop you. She nodded, took a deep breath, and stood. Behind her, Daniel, the retired Broadway actor who'd become our secret weapon, gave her a warm nod. The house lights dimmed. Applause rippled through the room like a heartbeat, then silence. The first scene began, and just like that, we were off. It was like watching a spark catch fire and spread across the stage. Each monologue felt like a lightning bolt. Jasmine's voice cracked just once, and the whole room leaned forward, holding their breath. Mateo's energy was magnetic, a live wire of grief and defiance. The ensemble pieces flowed seamlessly, switching from heartbreak to humor to raw truth without missing a beat. I stood just off stage, hands clutched together, chest tight. It was beautiful, devastating, real. My students weren't acting, they were living on that stage. By the end, there were tears in the crowd, real ones. A few people stood before the lights even came back on. The ovation rolled like thunder, echoing off the rafters. My kids blinked under the spotlight, stunned, then overwhelmed with emotion. Jasmine broke into quiet sobs. Mateo laughed and fist pumped the air. I stepped out and hugged them all. The local reporter came up to me afterward. That was something else, he said. Not a school play, a movement. I thanked him, smiling politely, heart pounding with pride. Only one thing, or rather one person, was missing. Tyler. I had texted him earlier, curtains at 7, we'd love to see you, no pressure but it would mean a lot. No reply, not even a good luck. By 9 p.m. I knew. I called, but it rang once, then went to voicemail. After everything, the tears, the victories, the sheer courage it took for my students to do what they'd just done, he hadn't shown up. I tried not to let it steal the moment. I posed for photos with the cast, helped clean up confetti and props, shook hands with the superintendent. But as I packed my car, phone buzzing in my coat pocket, I saw a text from Melissa, one of Tyler's coworkers and an old classmate of mine. Melissa, hey Lena, not my place maybe, but I thought you should know. I saw Tyler this afternoon. He's at the Willows Resort with Kelsey from work. They looked close. The words blurred. I read them 3 times before the screen dimmed. The Willows. The spa resort a couple hours away. We had once planned a weekend there to celebrate our engagement. I guess he didn't cancel the reservation after all, just changed who he was celebrating with. I drove home in silence, each mile a stone sinking in my stomach. He was there, at a resort with someone else, while my kids took the stage of their lives. I walked through our apartment's front door, the sound of keys against wood suddenly deafening. Tyler was already home, sitting on the couch, scrolling his phone like it was any other night. He looked up. Hey, my hands were shaking. Melissa saw you, he paused. So, at the Willows with Kelsey, he shrugged. So, that's it, that's all you have to say. He set his phone down with an exaggerated sigh. Lena, I didn't cheat. We just went away. I needed space. You've been obsessed with this play for months. I figured you wouldn't even notice. I stared at him, stunned. You skipped my student's opening night, the thing I've worked for nonstop, to go to a spa with another woman, he scoffed. It's not a Broadway debut, Lena. It's a school play. You act like you're changing the world or something. I am changing their world. He rolled his eyes and laughed, a low, cruel sound. You're just a teacher, Lena. What would you know about real success, real relationships? Something snapped, quietly, finally. I stepped into the bedroom, pulled open the top drawer, and took out the engagement ring he'd given me, simple, elegant, bought on a sale weekend. I walked back into the living room and held it out. You can keep it, I said, or return it, I don't care, just... Don't call me again. His mouth opened, but no sound came. For once, Tyler had nothing to say. I turned and left, closing the door behind me. It clicked shut with a strange kind of peace. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and let the tears come. Not just for the relationship, which, deep down, I'd already grieved, but for all the nights I'd questioned myself because of him. For all the times I'd played small so he could feel big. For how long I let myself be measured by someone else's yardstick. That night I cried for Lena Moore, the teacher who thought she needed someone like Tyler to be taken seriously. And somewhere beneath the heartbreak, I felt something steadier rising. The applause hadn't faded. The curtain hadn't dropped. And this was just my intermission. I didn't know about the video until 3 days after opening night. One of my students' parents, Jasmine's mom, actually, had propped her phone on the edge of her seat and filmed the entire performance. She posted a few clips on Facebook with a caption that simply read, "This is what schools should be fighting to protect. Watch these kids." It started small, a few dozen shares, then a few hundred. By day 4, it had passed 500,000 views. By the end of the week, 2.3 million. Local news stations called first, then NPR. A reporter from the Washington Post emailed me directly, saying she'd watched the full performance and wept. The words they used, raw, urgent. A revolutionary work from inside a high school black box, felt surreal. Students from other schools began messaging my kids online, thanking them for telling their stories. One girl from Michigan wrote Jasmine a comment that said, "You said the thing I was never brave enough to say out loud. You gave me permission to feel." My inbox exploded. My phone buzzed until it died from exhaustion. I turned off notifications after the 5th radio show asked if I could do a live segment before school hours. But the most unbelievable message came from an email address I almost deleted because it looked fake. "Dear Miss Moore, we saw the performance of Voices Unheard circulating online and were deeply moved by the honesty, courage, and creativity of your students. We would be honored to invite your cast to perform an excerpt of the piece at the upcoming International Youth Arts Summit in New York City this spring. All travel and accommodation will be covered. Please let us know your availability. Warm regards, Summit Coordinator, Youth Stage NYC." I blinked at the screen for a full minute, not sure if I was awake or dreaming. New York City. It wasn't just the bright lights or the travel, it was what it meant. That our tiny school's barely surviving drama department was being seen, heard on the biggest stage we could have imagined. I printed the email and brought it to rehearsal the next day. Jasmine read it out loud, her voice trembling. For a second, no one moved, then screaming. Crying, hugs, laughter. Mateo jumped off the stage and bear hugged me so hard I dropped my clipboard. "We're going to New York, Miss Moore, you did it." "No," I told them, barely able to speak past the lump in my throat. "You did," the school board called me in that same week. I expected pushback, logistics, budget constraints, red tape, but instead the superintendent himself stood up when I entered the room. "Lena," he said, "we'd like to formally reinstate the drama program, permanently, with a larger budget and new space renovations next year." I almost sat down on the floor right there and cried. "And," he added, "we've been contacted by the state education office. They'd like you to speak at the annual educators conference this summer about arts integration. Your program is becoming a model." I walked out of that meeting dazed, my feet barely touching the ground. All I could think about were the nights I'd stayed late in that freezing auditorium, wondering if it would ever be enough. Now the world was telling us it was more than enough. Back in the classroom, things felt electric. Students walked taller. Teachers stopped me in the halls to say congratulations. Parents sent handwritten thank you cards. One even brought me a box of pastries with a note. "Thank you for seeing what the rest of us sometimes miss." The most unexpected moment came one afternoon after school when I was alone on stage rearranging props. Mateo walked in, quieter than usual. He looked around, then sat on the edge of the stage. "Miss Moore," he said, voice low, "can I tell you something kinda personal?" I nodded and joined him. He swallowed. "Before this play, I didn't think I mattered that much. I mean, I joked around, yeah, but I always felt like people saw me as the clown, not the guy who could say something real." I stayed quiet, listening. But when I got up there and people listened, they felt what I said. That changed me. I thought I was just surviving school. Now I feel like I'm actually in it, like I belong somewhere. I smiled, my throat tight. "And you," he added, looking me dead in the eyes. "You didn't just teach me acting. You taught me how to be me. You saved my life." I broke. Tears slipped out before I could stop them. I hugged him hard. "You saved yourself, Mateo. I just handed you the mirror." When he left, I sat there alone for a long time, letting the weight of his words settle deep inside me. They were heavier than any review or viral headline. They were heavier than Tyler's insults, heavier than his absence. He had told me I was just a teacher. But here I was, watching students discover who they were, rewriting the narratives they'd been handed, showing the world their light. I wasn't just teaching theater. I was teaching healing. I was teaching belief. And now the world was watching, not because we screamed for it, but because we told the truth with shaking hands and full hearts. That night, I wrote a new quote on the whiteboard above my desk. One that wasn't from Shakespeare or Stanislavski, it was from Mateo. "You didn't just teach me acting, you taught me how to be myself." And that, I decided, would be the only review I'd ever really need. The first time I saw the Manhattan skyline rise above the bridge, I didn't breathe for several seconds. My students didn't either. "Holy crap," Matteo whispered, forehead pressed to the bus window. "It's like a movie." It really was. We'd landed at JFK that morning, groggy but buzzing. The organizers of the International Youth Arts Summit had arranged everything: transportation, hotel, even matching sweatshirts with the summit's logo. Jasmine cried when she saw her name printed on the welcome banner. Lewis took about 1,000 photos before we even reached the hotel lobby. I was just trying to keep it together. We spent the first day touring Times Square, the public theater, a walk through Central Park. Our official performance was scheduled for the next night at Lincoln Center. Not a black box auditorium with folding chairs, Lincoln Center. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, lights that didn't buzz or flicker. And we were on the roster. That evening, we held our final rehearsal in a borrowed classroom at the summit venue. The students were quiet, focused, carrying the weight of what this moment meant. I didn't give them a speech, just told them I believed in them more than ever. Back at the hotel, I barely slept. I paced, edited cue cards, reviewed the logistics one last time. But no matter how anxious I felt, I kept circling back to one thing: we earned this. We earned every minute of it. The next day moved like a dream. We arrived early, checked in with the stage manager, got a quick tour of the space. Jasmine kept wringing her hands. Matteo cracked jokes that no one laughed at. Even Daniel, seasoned Broadway veteran, was unusually quiet. "It's okay to be scared," I told them backstage. "That just means you care." The curtain rose to a near-silent audience. Hundreds of people, maybe more. Arts educators, press, talent reps, donors. We only had 20 minutes, an excerpt from Voices Unheard tailored for the summit's guidelines, but the moment our students began, the room held its breath. Jasmine's monologue hit like thunder. Lewis and Matteo's dialogue brought raw tears. The final ensemble scene ended with such stillness that I could hear someone in the audience audibly sniffle. Then, applause, not polite, not brief. A real standing ovation. People rose to their feet and kept clapping. Backstage, my students fell into a pile of hugs and tears. Matteo let out a whoop so loud security checked in on us. Jasmine was trembling and laughing at the same time. "You did it," I told them, voice cracking. "You made New York listen." I barely had time to catch my breath before a woman in a sharp navy blazer approached me with a card. "I'm with a performing arts high school in Chicago," she said. "We'd love to talk to Jasmine about a full scholarship." Jasmine's jaw dropped. She stared at the card like it might vanish. Another man in a tweed coat asked for Matteo's contact information. "I run a youth theater collective in Boston. That boy has presence. I'd like to see where he can go with proper mentorship." The whirlwind continued: handshakes, photos, interviews. People kept repeating the same phrases: powerful, transformative, necessary. One man, silver-haired, with eyes like he saw everything, introduced himself as a talent manager. "You don't just teach," he told me. "You create miracles. You don't even realize the waves you're making." I laughed softly, still stunned. "I just helped them find their voice." He smiled. "Exactly." The final surprise came later that evening, during the summit's closing reception. A woman from a national nonprofit approached me. She explained they focused on expanding arts education in underserved communities, programs like mine. She handed me a folder. "We'd like you to consider joining us," she said, National Director of Curriculum and Outreach. "You'd be helping schools across the country build what you built in that little black box theater." My hands shook as I took the folder. "You've proven what's possible," she added. "Now imagine doing that for thousands of students." I didn't say yes that night. I needed to process, needed to breathe. But the idea of multiplying what we'd done, of lifting more voices, building more futures, lit something in me. Later, I found myself backstage again, watching my students chat with kids from other schools, trading social handles, laughing, glowing with the kind of confidence that doesn't come from applause but from belonging. Jasmine caught me watching and came over. "Is this what you imagined?" I smiled. "No, it's so much more," she nodded thoughtfully. "I want to do this forever." I reached for her hand. "Then do it. You've already proved you can." As I looked out over the grand stage, echoing now with conversations and footsteps, I thought of everything that led us here. The broken lights, the bake sales, the sleepless nights, Tyler's laughter, his words, "You're just a teacher." And yet here I was in Lincoln Center, watching my students step into the world they'd built with nothing but truth and courage. No, I wasn't just a teacher. I was a builder of futures, a gatherer of voices, a quiet architect of something loud and lasting. And as I stood in the wings, surrounded by students whose lives were forever changed and who had changed mine, I thought they told me I was just a teacher. But teachers build futures, and this was the stage we earned. It had been 3 weeks since New York. The adrenaline had faded, but the afterglow hadn't. Our school's front office had to set up a special folder in my inbox just to handle the flood of scholarship inquiries, feature requests, and thank you notes. One letter came from a young girl in Oklahoma who wrote, "Watching your students made me want to live." I taped it on the bulletin board beside the stage door. Then one evening, as I was grading reflection essays from my seniors, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months. "Tyler." I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a message came through. "I know I don't deserve it, but can we talk, please?" The next day, we met at a quiet cafe downtown, not the fancy wine bar he used to favor, just a place with chipped mugs and the smell of burnt espresso. He looked different, not bad, just hollow, a man who'd expected the world to bend to him and was shocked when it didn't. "I lost the promotion," he said quickly, like it was old news. "Kelsey and I didn't work out either." I sipped my coffee. "I keep thinking," he continued, "about what we had. About what we could have had." He looked at me the way he used to, charming, a little sad, searching for something. "Do you ever think about us?" I smiled gently, not cruelly, not with bitterness, just with truth. "You once said I was just a teacher," I said, "but now the world knows better, and so do I." He opened his mouth, but I was already standing. "I wish you well, Tyler, I really do." I left without looking back. Later that week, I stood in my classroom, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows. It danced across the bulletin board, now overflowing with newspaper clippings, thank you notes, college acceptance letters, and photos from New York. Jasmine in mid-monologue, Mateo grinning beside a Broadway director, Louis holding up a scholarship certificate with both hands. I pinned up one last photo, a shot of all of us on the Lincoln Center stage, arms around each other, glowing. I stepped back and looked at the wall, a mosaic of hope. Tyler had measured success in numbers, in status, in who clapped the loudest, but me, I measured it in changed lives, in unshakable confidence, in the quiet power of young people finding their voice. I used to wonder if I was enough. If my classroom, my little stage, my worn-out lesson plans were really doing anything. Now I knew better. I wasn't just a teacher, I was their lighthouse. And now, I was mine too. The conference stage wasn't as grand as Lincoln Center, but to me, it meant something just as profound. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the ballroom of the downtown convention center. The audience was made up of fellow educators, public school teachers, arts coordinators, counselors, administrators, tired eyes, hopeful hearts, people who had given their lives to shaping others. And now they were here to hear me. I stood backstage in a soft navy dress, holding my note cards even though I didn't need them. A red TED-style carpet had been taped down center stage. The lighting was simple, bright, expectant. My name was announced. I walked out to the podium as applause greeted me, polite, not yet familiar. I adjusted the mic, looked out over the crowd, and began. When I was growing up, my mother worked 3 jobs so I could take theater classes at the local rec center. I wasn't the most talented. I wasn't the loudest. But I was the one who never left early, who stayed to ask questions, to sweep the stage, to write lines in the margins of math homework. Years later, when I became a drama teacher, I thought I knew what it meant to work hard. I didn't. Because nothing prepares you for pouring everything you have into young people and watching the world try to tell them they're not worth it. I paused, scanning the faces in front of me. Some nodded, some blinked slowly, already holding back emotion. I've been told I'm just a teacher, too many times to count. I've been told I'm wasting my degree, that I'm babysitting with a syllabus. That the arts are nice, but not necessary, but then, I clicked the remote. Behind me, the screen changed to a photo of my students bowing onstage, voices unheard, opening night. Something happened. I shared the story, the budget cuts, the bake sales, the heartbreak, the performance. I spoke about Tyler without using his name, how I'd been told, "You're just a teacher. What would you know about real success?" And then I spoke about the aftermath. The screen changed again, this time to a photo of Jasmine on the Juilliard steps, holding her acceptance letter and wearing the biggest smile I'd ever seen. She wrote her own monologue about surviving in a house where silence was safety. Now she's studying playwriting and performance in one of the top conservatories in the world. Next was a shot of Matteo, standing in front of a chalkboard that read, Young Voices Theater Collective Free Workshops for Local Teens. He's teaching now. Says he wants to be the kind of mentor he never had until he joined my class. Then came Louis, pictured beside a community mural he'd painted, vibrant, fierce, full of color. He learned set design in our tiny high school black box. Now he creates entire worlds on walls across the city. I turned back to the audience. You see, when you tell someone they're just anything, just a student, just a kid, just a teacher, what you're really doing is handing them a ceiling. But teachers don't hand out ceilings, we tear them down. A silence filled the room, not empty, but full. I'm standing here today not because I did anything extraordinary, I said softly, but because I refused to believe I was ordinary, and because I refused to believe my students were either. I stepped forward, no notes now, just me, standing on the stage I earned. So the next time someone tells you you're just a teacher, remind them, I pointed to the screen behind me, which now read, Teachers build the stages the world stands on. There was a beat, then the room rose, a full standing ovation, some clapped, some cheered. Some simply wiped tears from their eyes and nodded, as if to say, I've been there too. I stepped off the stage and into a blur of handshakes, hugs, and heartfelt thanks. But one voice stayed with me, an older woman in a cardigan with a voice like velvet. You made me remember why I started, she said. I'd almost forgotten. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I stood by the window looking out over the city. Lights blinked far below. A taxi honked in the distance. I thought of that first night after the performance when Tyler hadn't shown up. I thought of what he said, standing in our living room, You're just a teacher, Lena. What would you know about real success? And I thought of the faces in the audience today. Of Jasmine, Matteo, Louis. Of the classroom wall back home, filled with letters and clippings and dreams made real. He walked away when I was building something, but I stayed, and I lit up the world.